This is Stoneleigh Abbey in Warwickshire, historic home of the Leigh family. Jane Austen came here in 1806 for an unexpected 9-day visit with her wealthy relatives. She was so impressed, she found inspiration for 4 of her novels.
Edward V Baron Leigh's final commissioned work. Jane Austen herself would have seen this. Welcome to the Saloon. This is Edward's commissioned work, who he brought in 5 artists to help him do this. And it took at least literally 4.5 years to do. And when we look at the story of Edward and look at the story of Hercules, they almost seem as if they connect together. Hercules given the choice of 2 ladies to marry and have children with, given to him by his mother. Virtue, the lady of strength, standing up, and then Sloth, the lady who's just lounging. Hercules chooses the lounger, Sloth, the wrong choice. This upsets his mother, and she puts a curse upon Hercules, which is madness.
The composer Handel came here in the late 1740s, and that's why he's above the door.
Edward III himself married Mary Holbeach because his father wouldn't pay him any money, so he said marry into wealth, and that's what he did. And it was her money that built the West Wing. Now Edward was going to give the inheritance to his son, his firstborn, but sadly his firstborn son Edward, who was named after himself, died a month before Edward died, so he had to change the will, and he then gave it to his weaker son, Thomas IV Baron Leigh. Thomas IV married Maria Rebecca Craven, and that's how we get the Craven connection, but sadly they both died within a short period of time, and Thomas died at the age of 36, which means the house now needs to be inherited again. There's a book that Jane Austen wrote that I don't think she ever finished, The Watsons. So this lady is called Eleanor Penelope Watson. There are 2 sisters, and they're meant to be very kind ladies. The gentleman between the 2 ladies here, Jane Austen obviously liked his name, because he is the brother of Eleanor Penelope Watson, so his name is Thomas Watson. But he inherited a huge location up north and changed his name. His name was now Thomas Watson, Wentworth Woodhouse. And if you look at your Jane Austens, Watson, Wentworth and Woodhouse are 3 characters, as well as Thomas, Eleanor and Penelope. William Leigh. He was High Sheriff of Mercia in the mid-1600s, which means he was in charge of everybody in the Midlands, and everything. The only man above him was the King. And the King said to William to collect the ship's tax from inland locked Warwickshire, which he did. Sadly, it didn't go down well, and he was imprisoned in Gloucester jail. The jailer said to William, if you want to keep your head on your shoulders, marry my daughter and give her 3/4 of your money.
So William married the 21-year-old Joanna Puri.
William himself was 54. As you can see, here she is showcasing how rich she is by holding tulips. During this time, there was a tulips fever. And if you had tulips in your house, then it showed you how wealthy you are. 1 tulip is the price of a house. In that vase, there's 3 houses. In her hand is a black tulip, that's an estate, showcasing how rich she is. Theophilus Leigh, he was an MP. He had no support until he saw an invader coming. His name was William of Orange. Theophilus got himself an army and made their way down to the south. By the time they got down there, the army that went with Theophilus left him standing. He hurried back home and had his portrait changed, having an orange sash added to his portrait showcasing his support of William of Orange entering the UK. Theophilus had many liaisons, but eventually met the love of his life, and that was a lady called Mary Bridges.
They have a daughter.
I want to call her after my best friend, and his best friend was the lady up there, Cassandra, Duchess of Chandos. Her name before she married, though, was Cassandra Willoughby. If you're a Jane Austen fan, you know the Willoughbys. Now that daughter that was born was named Cassandra, and she married George Austen, which means Reverend Thomas Leigh and Jane were Jane Austen's grandparents, Mary and Theophilus were Jane Austen's great-grandparents, and Joanna and William were Jane Austen's great-great-grandparents. And the lady that brought Jane Austen here in the first place was the lady who died and brought the inheritance up, and that's Mary Leigh, who of course looked after her brother for 10 years and died in 1806 when the inheritance came up. So here's your whole Jane Austen connection and how she got here in the first place. But originally what was here was actually a dining table. And Jane Austen herself sat at this dining table talking and listening to the stories over at this dining table, and she heard of a story that actually happened at that exact dining table. And it's the story of the lady just up here whose name was Elizabeth Lord. She and her sister Mary were told by their mother that they must marry incredible wealth, wealthy suitors. Mary did. She married Lord Leigh. Elizabeth didn't. She married a gentleman called Lieutenant Wentworth. This marriage was kept quiet. So every time Elizabeth's mum kept pushing her to marry into wealthy suitors and kept bringing her wealthy suitors, she kept on turning them down. The mother got angered and threw Elizabeth out of the house. Elizabeth came here to stay with her sister and brother-in-law, and she was known as Auntie Betty by the children. But later on, after a short period of time, Lord Leigh sent a letter to this Lieutenant Wentworth, who by this point had turned into a Captain Wentworth. And he said to the gentleman, you need to come back here and meet your wife and your mother-in-law and sort this business out. So, Captain Wentworth, also known as Lord Colvane, sat at the dinner table, alongside his wife, the mother-in-law, the sister-in-law and brother-in-law. And they all had dinners, and they were discussing things. The mother seemed to take a liking, and she allowed the wedding to continue and the marriage to continue. Now, if you look at that story, look at the story of Persuasion, although slightly different, it is pretty much the story of Persuasion. This is the bed that Queen Victoria slept in. She didn't use the bed covers. She brought her own bed covers. She was always a little scared of the touch of poison. These are the chairs that Queen Victoria sat in. These are the mirrors that Queen Victoria looked into. And these are the curtains that she saw open and close morning and evening. The only difference being it wasn't in this room. It was one floor above. But as people live there, they can't go wandering in. But it is the same style rooms, same colour scheme, same size. So there's nothing different. This room itself would have been the breakfast room, and the window that you're looking out of is the very window that Jane Austen sat at with her desk. And she looked out of that window and she described what she saw.
And what she'd heard.